right. And so the thing is, when we talk about money, it can be awkward. It doesn't have to be first date awkward. It doesn't have to be that awkward, but it can be difficult to talk about and difficult to talk to. When we kind of talked about the kind of money, sex, and power series, I was pretty confident which of the three I was going to end up with. And so I get the joy of talking about money, and automatically you kind of think, oh no, he's gonna talk about, let's just give more of our money away, and that's the deal, let's just get through it. And it can be really awkward, but the thing is, Jesus talks about it a lot. Like Jesus, as we say many times, he's not afraid to be awkward. Jesus is the kind of guy who would talk to you on a tube, or on a plane, which is worse, because you're stuck for 13 hours. Although being stuck next to Jesus 13 hours would be all right, wouldn't it, obviously? So Jesus is not afraid to come at these big topics. And so the passage that Rob read before, we're not going to read the whole thing again, but there's some really kind of challenging words in here. And so I'm just going to start with verse 28 to 30 in Luke 14. It says, "Suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? For if you lay the foundation and you're not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule you, saying, 'This person began to build and was not able to finish.'" And there's so many other big challenging words in this passage that Rob read. Just to pick out a couple of more of the verses, like the verse before that says, "Whoever doesn't carry my cross and follow me can't be my disciple." And then in verse 33 says, "In the same way, those of you who don't give up everything can't be my disciple." And you're like, oh man, all right, Jesus. And so it's tough. But you know what, we can see these as real negative things. We can see this as like, oh my goodness, how can we live up to such an ideal, and how can we ever make this? But Jesus isn't kind of just saying like this is a negative thing. And we think of money often as, oh, this is just going to be a negative, we're going to have to give. But he's calling us to a better way. He's calling us into a better kingdom. He's calling us into something that matters more than just what we see in our society, which is that you do well, you work hard, you get more money, you get more stuff. And so we're going to look at some of the elements that kind of Jesus talks about and how we can apply these. And the first thing that I want to talk about is that just as Jesus says, like, if you're going to build a tower, you first sit down and you work out the cost. Like, the cost is not irrelevant. He's not saying it's not going to cost you anything. That whole passage is called the cost of being a disciple. At no point is Jesus saying, do you know what, just follow me, guys, because you're awesome, it's going to be awesome, and we'll have a wonderful time. He says, yeah, it's going to be that I'm going to bring you life, and I'm going to bring you life that matters. But don't think that that doesn't come in conflict with this world. Don't think that that doesn't look different to the way that the rest of the world is, because it is going to look different, and it is going to carry a cost. And so what we're going to look at is how, whilst it carries a cost in the eyes of the world, actually what he's promising us is something so much better. And if we think about kind of cost and the way that the kind of world works and football works, football is broken. Like, we all know football is broken. If you follow anything to do with football, there was a guy transferred this week for like £500,000 a week, which is just hideous and insane. So football is broken. Like, there's nothing good about like the way to succeed in football, which is you buy better players, and you buy better players because you've got money. And maybe if you've got better players, you'll win more games, and so on and so on. And that is the way that a lot of football works. And my team, the obviously wonderful Grimsby Town, we had 4 years in non-league football, which is terrible. It was exciting at first because we were like, oh, we get to go to places like Braintree Town, which is not even a place, I'm sure. It just sounds like a pub team. And they beat us 5-0. And so we just kind of thought, oh, we'll go down, it'll be amazing, we'll win loads of games. It did not turn out like that. And so we just were so miserable about being rubbish and playing these terrible teams and not winning, that we decided, right, we've tried to get promotion, it's not worked. And so some of our fans launched something called Operation Promotion. Not the snappiest of titles. And because we are low, we don't have these kind of millions of pounds to throw around. We wanted to raise money. We hadn't bought a footballer for like 4 years. We hadn't bought a player. We have no money. Our chairman owned a fish factory. That's not going to make you incredibly wealthy. And so therefore, like, what we decided to do, we're going to raise money to buy a player. And we aim to raise £20,000. That is not a lot in the scheme of football these days. Footballers are going for £140 million. Grimsby, we raised 20,000. And like Pete said, we crowdfunded it. And so we did a crowdfunding thing, and we made it. We made more than £20,000. We made 110,000, thanks to people like our celebrity kind of fan, Man versus Food Man. He chucked in some money. And so therefore, we bought a footballer called Omar Bogle for 40,000 of the Queen's pounds. And we were excited because we had a player. And we were like, man, if this guy doesn't get us promoted, it's cost us all something. You know, I bought a T-shirt which says clap, 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 fish. £50, rip-off. But I bought a part of a footballer. But I was all right because I bought Omar Bogle and he was worth it. And just to prove that we love Omar Bogle... Beautiful. Well, we've played it again. That's gone wrong. We don't need to play that again. Just to prove that not all Grimsby Town songs are about fish or involve bad language. And so therefore, we kind of loved Omar Bogle. But the reason we really kind of loved it is because it felt like for once we were all in something together. Instead of just maybe somebody in the club putting some money in and buying some players, everybody had got involved. We'd all kind of given to it. We'd all kind of sacrificed. And we'd all kind of said, right, we're in this together. And Grimsby fans, we are negative, moaning people. We just are. We as soon as anything goes wrong, we go, oh, no, yeah, typical. Within 30 seconds, you'll hear us moaning. We're every team thinks they've got the best fans in the world. Not us. We are moaning, terrible fans. We're bad at it. But for 1 year, we're all happy because we're do you know what? It's cost us. We're in this, and we're in this together. And so Jesus is talking, as he's talking about kind of putting yourself in the game. Americans have a great phrase called putting some skin in the game, getting involved, getting off the bench, and actually putting yourself onto the field of play. And Jesus is talking about the cost of being a disciple. And there's the cost in many ways. The rest of that chapter goes on about the reputational cost, inviting people that you aren't necessarily comfortable with, that you don't necessarily associate with. So there's so many more costs than just money that he's talking about, but he is also talking about money. We can't just say, oh, well, yeah, but there's so many more costs. There are. But Jesus talks about money it's estimated at about 10% of the Gospels. That's a lot. And if he's talking about it 10%, we've got to look at it. We've got to take it seriously. And so we have to look at this kind of cost of money, and we have to look at this awkward balance. And I always think this is kind of balance between stewardship and kind of faith, between managing things wisely, but then trusting God. We do not want as a church to not do anything because we don't see we've got the money in the bank. We don't want to be in a position where God says, I want you to do this. And we go, nah, do you know what, God? I know you want us to do that, but we ain't got the money in the bank. That's not what we want to be. And again, I know that because I've been here since, day one, we know, and some of us have seen the journey of God kind of coming through when we thought we were out of money, when we had nothing, and we were like, this makes no sense to keep sticking to what we believe God said about giving half the money away. It'd be so much easier to pull that in and spend it on ourselves. But you know what? Just as we kind of think, well, we're running out, God is there, because if God is calling us to do it, well, then he's calling us to do it. And we've got to trust that he will provide and he will be there, kind of saying, look, do you know what? If you follow me, I'm going to trust you. We just sang, let go my soul and trust in him. And that's such a challenge when it comes to our money, because you can almost do it once and think, yeah, I trust you with my money. But then you've got to do it again the next day and the next day and the next day. There's so many kind of times. I was talking with Dan about last night about I don't really care about having a nice car generally, which is good because I don't have a nice car. And so it is literally like a go-kart for an old lady. And that's all right. And so generally, I don't care. I really don't. I know it doesn't matter. As long as it gets me from A to B, I'm happy. But there are so many times, I was on a train with a student I teach, and basically we got off to get to the car park, and as we went to our cars, I felt really embarrassed because I was like, man, this student who I'm sort of 13 years further down my career than she is, and I've got this terrible car, and it's like, look at what you could have won, look at who you could become, this man with a and I was a bit embarrassed, and I was like, I know it doesn't matter, but we have to have that kind of challenge to trust God and know, God, I choose to trust you, even when the world would say, do you know what, you could get better stuff, you could do different things. And we have to make that choice again and again. So we have this balance between faith, but also stewardship, and also using it wisely. There's a great story of a guy who was doing an offering at a church, and he was speaking at a conference, and they said, look, there's a missionary who we work with who needs $7,000 for some urgent hospital equipment in the kind of country that she works in. And she said, will you just pray for the offering? And he said, no. And he just said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open my wallet, I'm going to put everything I've got in today, I'm just going to lob it in. We'll see where we get, and if we're short, then I'll pray. And he said it was great because I had $2.25. And so he said, it's a great tactic to do when you've come with nothing. And so he just lobbed it in, and obviously then gave it to the person at the front with him. And that person at the front's got two choices. You either empty your wallet or you lie. And so they were like, I've got $100, cheers. And so they threw it in, and it passed it round. And they needed to raise this few $1,000s, and they had 2,000 more. By the end of the time it had gone round, they had 2,000 more than they needed. And he said, we're not just going to sit here and pray and say, God, can you do this? When he's given us the things in our hands to do it ourselves, when he's given us the ability to meet these needs. And so Jesus doesn't just call us to kind of trust him and follow him and, look at our reputation. He says, look, if you're going to be part of a different kingdom, I want you to put some skin in the game. I want you to get involved. I want you to not just kind of say, oh, well, I trust that God will provide. But God will provide, but he'll provide with his church, having open hands as well. That, just as Jesus said, the least you do, what you do for the least of these, you did for me. And that involves action. That involves us doing something. That involves us kind of taking some steps ourselves. And that will come into conflict with the rest of the world, because the thing we find with money is that often we kind of think money is ours. I work hard for that money. That is my money. And so I'm going to spend it on the stuff I want. And just as an example, we have a video.
3 words for you. Treat yourself. Treat yourself 2011. Once a year, Donna and I spend a day treating ourselves. What do we treat ourselves to?
Clothes.
Treat yourself.
Fragrances.
Treat yourself.
Massages.
Treat yourself.
Mimosas.
Treat yourself.
Fine leather goods.
Treat yourself.
It's the best day of the year.
The best day of the year.
I got a question. What do you think? I really want this dress, and I like this crystal beetle, but it's expensive, and there's no use for it.
Don Amigo, treat yourself. Velvet slippies, cashmere socks, velvet pants, cashmere turtle. I'm a cashmere velvet candy cane.
Treat yourself.
This is insane.
That is insane. So, but then the kind of nature of the world is that we could treat ourselves. We've got some money. We've worked. Let's treat ourselves. Now, none of us are saying don't buy any stuff. We're not we're just saying there is this shift that your money you've got is for you, and that is yours. You can ring fence that. You can do what you want. Do some good with it, but ultimately that belongs to you. And I just think Jesus has come to us and says, look, I have a different way. I have a different way, saying, look, honestly, if you trust me, you can be part of a better way, a better kingdom. Pete shared about CAP and all the amazing things that we get to be part of by people who are able to kind of give some money and donate time so that we can be part of something that brings hope to lives. We know of, we do kind of work with Mayak in Russia where we see young women rescued from slavery and prostitution. Why? Because people know what it is to kind of faithfully give and faithfully sacrifice so that we can give to something bigger and something better than ourselves. Our accounts get reviewed every year. We have to go through a review as part of a charity. And the people who review our accounts, a couple of guys that I know, and so they kind of said to me, how does your church work? Where does the money come from? Do you get many grants and this kind of stuff? And I said, it comes from people. People just give. And that just baffled him. He's like, okay, I get that people give to charity, but he said, but where does the majority of it come from? I said, it literally all comes from people. And he did not get it because he was like, right, he said, but I give to charity. And then he looked at kind of the bank statement. He's like, oh, well, I'm assuming you've got loads of millionaires at your church. And I was like, that would be nice, wouldn't it? I said, but I said, no, we don't have millionaires. And he said, oh. And I said, but what we are is we're part of something bigger. And he didn't get it because in his world, what he does is he's got some money from a job, and he spends it. And if he's got a little bit left at the end of the month, he'll go, maybe I'll give that to something good. Or, he looks at what he's got and he says, okay, I can spare that bit. But our heart is not to see what we can spare. Our heart is not right, what can we, do? What have we got left? We don't give 50% away because we're loaded. We don't give 50% away because we literally have no idea what to do with this 50%. Let's just give it away. We didn't think that was a good idea. We give 50% away partly because Lucas felt God say that on week 1, and that stung us, that hamstrung us in. No, he didn't. So Lucas just said, do you know what? I feel God wants us to be this kind of church, to have that heart. And so therefore, it's something that we decided we don't give because we've got loads. We give because we feel it's in God's heart, and we want to partner with heaven and be part of something bigger. The reason I did tell about this Omar Bogle story was not just to show a song about Omar Bogle, but that one year, in Grimsby, Omar Bogle scored loads of goals, and we got promoted. And it was this one year that we somehow all felt part of something bigger. Now, I could name some of the players, but I don't have that involvement. But the year that we were in, where we all put in together, it felt like we were on a journey. And that is just lower league football. It's meaningless. But it was the greatest year of being a fan. And how much more when Jesus invites us to be part of that kingdom, not just to sit and watch and say, look at what my church can do, look at what I can do. He's saying, if you partner with me, if you get involved, if you get in the game, I will take you on a journey to live for a bigger kingdom. And it calls us so much more. I mean, Grimsby did sell Omar Bogle for £1 million. I got no money from that. And so, I mean, technically I put £50 in, so, but never mind. But I gave it not because of what I could get back, because I believed in the bigger project. Which was less important than what we're talking about here. So I will stop. And so the cost can be scary. So we know there's a cost. We know that it's not irrelevant. We know Jesus talks about the cost. And it can be scary. It talks about, as we read before, about having enough money to build the tower, making sure you've counted that cost. And it can be terrifying. And Pete will know, and other people will know, the kind of the fear that comes to us when we think about money sometimes, because money can feel like it's out of control. Money can feel like it has a hold over us, and just even thinking about it, talking about it, hearing about it is just difficult. And we can kind of go, yeah, it must be all right for you guys. You've all got it sorted. Everybody's got it together except me. And some of you here know my story. Some of you don't know my story. But when I was 24 probably, I kind of worked in a big accounting firm. But I was 21 when I spent £80 for the first time on a credit card with the aim of buying some second-hand golf clubs so I could play golf with my mates. And I thought, well, I'm going to get some money back, and then in like a month I'll be able to pay that off. And that was the aim, that in a month that £80 would be done. I'd never use a credit card again. That was my plan. 3 years later, I was in 15 grand of debt, maxed all credit cards, overdrafts maxed. I knew what it was to go into shops, try and use my card, have it declined. I had no idea how much money. I didn't check my bank balance for easily a year because I just did not want to know what was in there, okay? Because I knew what is in there is not going to last. I am in trouble. But you know what? I just thought if I just get my head down and avoid it, maybe somehow it will come good. And I knew it's not going to come good, but I thought I can't deal with it. It's too big. It's out of control. And so I would kind of go into shops. The card would get declined. I'd put the stuff back. I'd leave. I'd not tell anybody. And I'd get on with my day. And so at that point, I would just be like going through day after day after day for about a year. And I remember the day where it all came to a head, where I was stood with my mum, visiting them just over a weekend. I stood at a cash point on payday, the one day when in my month where I'm supposed to have some money. And as I went to check my bank and take some money out for payday, the bank declined and said, "You've got no money." And I was like, oh man, this is the one day money's gone in and I have no money. And I just started to cry at this cash point, and I was like, my mum was like, "What's going on?" And I had to tell my mum, this woman who'd quit her job to kind of trust in God and be this woman who goes into schools in my town and tell them about Jesus. And she lives that balance between faith and stewardship so well. My parents have so little, but what they have, they manage so well, and they trust God, and they live so responsibly. And I thought, man, this kind of son with a proper job as an accountant, wow, and he's just messed it all up, and I was so ashamed. And I spoke to her, and I was just like, I told her everything, and I knew they couldn't help. I knew they didn't have money. I knew, like, we're just not a wealthy family. They can't just give me stuff. That's not the way we work. And so I didn't know what to do, and it turns out they went out and they just took some debt on themselves. And they said, right, we're going to give you enough money to get through and pay your rent this month, pay for some food and live. We said, talk to people. So I had to sit down with Lucas. I had to sit down with a couple of others, and I said, here's my mess. And we had to sort it all out, and it took me 3 years. And it was 3 years of dull, consistent, steady decisions. Nothing glamorous. It was 3 years of not spending. Like, we live in a day where you can go online, few clicks, and tons of money can go out your account. You can tap in a shop, and none of it feels real. And so I had to do 3 years of just avoiding everything. 3 years of, no, I can't afford that. 3 years of, no, don't do that. Don't do that. Do sensibly. And in the first month, it felt freeing, and then after 6 weeks, it felt boring. And then after like a year, I was like, man, is this ever going to end? And it feels like it is never going to end. But you have to constantly do it again and again and again. And so I know that the cost can be scary. I know that talking of money is terrifying and it can be out of control. But I promise you that if we are open and vulnerable and we take ownership of these small issues, I promise you it can be transformational to our lives, and it can give us the freedom that we're meant to live with. None of us are meant to walk in this kind of cloud where we just think, man, I can't cope with this. I don't know what I'm going to do. And it just weighs and it just hangs on you. And people would tell me, that kind of in that time, well, you've got no money, so just quit giving to everything. And I remember people like saying, well, obviously you quit giving to the church. And I was like, but that felt so weird, because I was like, but if I say that Jesus is like the most important thing and then just quit giving to church but keep Sky Sports, seems like I feel that Sky Sports is more important if I'm doing that. And I feel that Jesus should be more important than Sky Sports. And I thought about it and prayed, and he is. And so it's good to know I got to that place. And so, but it meant I had to make tough, sensible decisions. It's not glamorous, it's not spectacular, but in the same way that when Lucas talked about kind of sex, I wasn't here, but I'm assuming he would have talked about sex and purity and what a gift it is. But we make those decisions. A lot of small, good, wise, sensible decisions will lead to a massive impact on our lives. And so it is with money. If we know what it is to take control and say, right, God, I trust you with this, and I'm going to really know what it is to get on top of things and manage things, then actually I believe as he does that, as we partner with him, then he brings us great kind of life. And I know it's awkward, but I promise you it's worth sitting down and going through that pain and going through that process. Because the alternative of not doing it is costlier. Like, Jesus calls us not to give our money in because God has some weird fascination with our money. God is not like poor and desperate for our cash. Like, there's no like weird sense that, well, you've got to give me money. Why? Because I want it. Like, Jesus knows the hold that money can have on us. He knows that we live in a kingdom and we live in a world where really we know money equals power, power equals success. We know that system. And Jesus knows how that system can trap us, how it can have our hearts, how we can build our hopes and our lives upon that system. So the reason he comes again and again and again is saying, guys, be different. Be something different. Be, as he talks about being salt and light, be so different that the world thinks you're weird. And like, he calls us out because he knows the alternative if we don't live like that is that we lose that kind of that power, we lose that authority, we lose that intimacy of knowing what it is to trust him, of knowing what it is to really rely on God. When we can manage it ourselves and have God as a kind of side thing cheering us on, that's not the relationship he wants us. He wants us to know what it is to let go and trust him. And the alternative is we miss it. If we miss out on kind of living those costly lives, laying down our lives, the alternative is just poorer. And Jesus, we're not going to go through all of these verses, but he talks about it again and again. And Matthew 6 is so challenging. Like, it's just, it's such a challenging kind of chapter. And Jesus talks there about not storing up treasure for yourself, not building your life on treasures here where things can be destroyed. But then at the end he says, look, where your treasure is, that's where your heart will be. Like, the things that you value, the things that you really treasure, the things that you put your time in, that's what's in your heart. That's what you care about. And so he doesn't come, oh, I want your money because that's the rules. He's saying, oh, I want your heart. And you can't give me your heart if you're holding back on some of the stuff that you're afraid by. And just in the same passage, he goes even harder line, and he just kind of says, right, you can't serve two masters. You're going to hate one and love the other, or devote to one and despise the other. You can't serve both God and money. You can't have both at the top. You just like, you can't say, right, well, I'll really push, and that'll be my aim, and do you know what, God, you can have a bit. He's like, that's not the system that he wants. He's saying, right, are you going to lay down your lives and follow me with everything? And that means everything. Like, and so that challenge comes to us, and I'm never, thankfully, a guy who's been particularly interested in a career, which is good, because I went in that days when I had that big proper accounting job. We went on this weekend away to Dublin as a bit of a social trip. Imagine a social accounting trip to Dublin. Imagine the fun we didn't have. And so we were there, and me and a guy, we were just kind of, we shared a room, a guy from work, and so kind of I was just sleeping in my twin bed. He was obviously awake and bored, and he woke me up in the world's worst possible way. I promise you, I know some of you think, oh no, water in the face, that's the worst. I promise you there is a worse way. This is the way that he woke me up. Like, that is not a way to wake. Like, he just stood on his bed, jumped from his bed, and elbow dropped me in the chest. Obviously, I thought I was going to die. That is I mean, I'm going to stop that now. But you can't wake up, with this kind of instant fear of, oh my goodness, what is this? Like, I am being attacked. And you think, all right, well, that was funny for you. Cheers. But then for the rest of the weekend, and then at the staff Christmas party, and with whoever he could tell that was important in our firm, he would be like, oh yeah, and when we went to Dublin, me and Del were wrestling in our hotel room. We were not wrestling. I was asleep and I was attacked. And that is it. There was no then fight afterwards. There was me going, what, struggling to breathe. And then he would go on. He would say, oh yeah, no, we just had a little wrestle. We didn't have a little wrestle. And there'd be people in charge of the firm looking at us like, you guys are weird. And he'd be like, no, there was nothing weird there. We were wearing Speedos. What are you doing? None of this is true. And I was like, it is a good job that I don't care about a career, because you have just chopped it to the ground. Like, you have just set fire to it. It is over. But I do inhabit this kind of empty kind of business system, and I kind of teach a lot of students who are part of these big money-making, accounting kind of enterprises that just churn out individuals. And one of the greatest kind of privileges I get is that after 3 years of studying and passing exams, we kind of take them out and we say, when they've done their final exam, we take them for a drink and say, like, well done, you've qualified, good luck with the rest of your lives and all that kind of stuff. And I just get opportunities in there to kind of just get a little bit behind the kind of scenes almost, in terms of, rather than just me presenting from the front about how to account for something, you get to see where people are at. And the amount of people that see that system that just uses them as a resource, and if you work really hard and you do crazy 80, 90-hour weeks and you make more money for the firm, you'll get promoted. And what for? So you can have more money that you can't use because you're exhausted and you're at work. And you can see these people who are 22, 23, 24 thinking, this is not what I signed up for. This is not what I wanted my life to be. And just the ability to kind of say, guys, I promise you there is more out there. I promise you can live for better things. And I get the opportunity. They always kind of say, like, why did you leave? Why do you teach now instead of leaving? And I just kind of say it's better than having a real job. But then I always kind of just say, look, I do this other stuff that matters more to me. And I talk about the Life Church youth, and I talk about the kind of things that I'm passionate about. And I just kind of say, I got this opportunity just in a brief moment in that world of accounting, in a pub, where I just say to them, guys, I promise you, you don't have to get on this treadmill. Like, you can be a great person in those places. There's loads of good people. But that is not the goal. The goal is not that if you work hard, you'll get a promotion, you'll get more money, you can work harder. It's not a system that's going to do you any good. There's a better way. There's a better life to live. And there's a kind of great story that I always get challenged by when I'm thinking of our young people, which is that one of my favorite authors, a guy called Donald Miller, his youth pastor when he was young, he was like a massive influence on his life. And he was the first guy to kind of challenge him to write and say, I think you could be good at this. And he said, like, this guy believed in me when nobody else did. But then this guy died, and he said he went to the funeral, and as he turned up and he kind of went around this guy's hometown and his house, he said his house wasn't anything. He'd never got married, and it was he just had no real stuff. It was a bit shabby. And he remembers, like, walking around just feeling quite sad, like, is this the sum of his life? Like, is this what it's come to? Was it worth it? But then he said, like, just as he was kind of thinking that, the next day they went to the funeral, and this guy's life had impacted so many people that he had his funeral in a baseball stadium. And so he realized at that point, he's like, man, this guy got it more than any of us. This guy didn't just build his life on stuff. This guy knew what it was to live a life that was laid down for people, live a life that mattered, and live a life that counted. You can do that if you have stuff. Like, some of the greatest spiritual influences on my life are people who have had wealth and known what it is to manage it well, and known what it is to not have that as their priority. And so it's not about not having stuff. It's not about, oh, you've got to be poor. It's just about, like, having that as your heart and not kind of putting our hope in this. There's a great tweet from a guy called Tim Keller who says, Christianity doesn't give you what you want. It's like an explosion that destroys everything you had to make way for everything new, and to make way for something new. And it's just like, that is the gospel that I want. Like, the young people, we talked about it, Sarah mentioned it before, we're just kind of going through the book of Matthew. We've been going through this devotional, which kind of I did when I was 25 maybe, and just really burnt out by the whole business world, thinking there's got to be more to this. And as I read the book of Matthew and realized, man, that's the journey I want to go on. I want to go on this journey with Jesus. And as we do it, we see this king who comes to say, I'll promise you, everything you think you know about the system of this world, if you lay it down, let me destroy it, and I will put in you something so much better. I will put in something that is worth it, something that is so much more. And we know that that is the kind of the way to live, and we have that challenge again and again and again. And so to kind of pretty much finish us off, like, Jesus doesn't come just because he wants our money, as we've said many times. He doesn't just come so that we just kind of mindlessly give our money and that's the deal. Like, Jesus is pretty harsh to the Pharisees who know what it is to give away 10% of their stuff, but neglect the heart of what really matters. Like Jesus tells that story about the widow's mite that Pete mentioned before, where this woman who just didn't have much, but trusted God and gave it to him. He said, that is worth more than somebody who's got loads, just give me a little bit. It's about the heart. It's about what we care about. And he says this in Matthew 23. He says, like, woe to you, you teachers, you hypocrites. You give a tenth, and then he goes on about your spices. You give a tenth of your spices, but you've neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, faithfulness. You should have done the latter without neglecting the former. You blind guides, you strain out a gnat and you swallow a camel, because Jesus uses strange imagery. And so, but like, he's not saying do one or the other. He's saying, honestly, you've got to do both. You've got to pursue justice and mercy and faithfulness. But as part of that, you still give. He doesn't just say, I'd rather you did the second and don't do the first. He's saying, honestly, when you live a life that pursues these things, our money will follow. And I don't want to promise our young people a life that's kind of radical and a life that, saying, if you do this and trust Jesus, it'll be amazing. I don't want more for them than I want for my own life. I don't want to promise them this life of amazing trusting in Jesus if I'm not doing it myself. So I'm not going to stand up in front of our young people and say, you can do this. If I'm not a man who knows, my heart is to trust Jesus and my heart is to follow him. So I want to be somebody who knows what it is to pursue these things. And I want to be somebody whose bank account follows the heart. Like, if I look at what I really believe, I want my bank account to be under that. I want my bank account to be part of what matters to me, that it really is what I believe, that I spend stuff on what counts. Paul goes in 2 Corinthians, talk about the kind of heart, and he says, whoever sows sparingly will reap sparingly, and goes through that. And if you sow generously, you'll reap generously. But it's really that kind of bottom bit. Decide what's in your heart to give, not under compulsion, not reluctantly, because God loves a cheerful giver. And it's all about the heart. It's all about not just being guilted into giving stuff. We don't do a collection. We don't do a collection because we would make more money if we did a collection. 100%. There's no way. I reckon if we put a collection plate in front of people's face, we'd make 10%, 15% more money, no problems. Why? Because it's there and people think, I probably should give because it's in front of me. Not interested. We don't want to do that. We don't want to do that because we don't want to guilt trip people and go, can you give us money because we've shoved something in front of you? That's not the heart. We want people to go, do you know what, God? I'm just going to trust you. And whatever that means for me with my time, with my money, with the places I go, with the influence that I have, with the people I speak to, I want to use all of these things for your kingdom. And that's going to be between us and God and our hearts. And so I've got one final kind of story and then we're done. And it's about a guy who was given some money. And there's a guy called Shane Claiborne who is so challenging on money, and he lives this kind of really radical, challenging lifestyle about kind of living very simply and ministering to the poor. And they won 10 grand in a court case about police brutality. And so that 10 grand could have done a lot of good in their community. They could have used it for loads of stuff. But he decided that he would send 100 sets of $100 bills to people who he thought whose heart really reflected the kingdom of God. So he sent it to 100 churches and charities who really knew what it was to minister. And so he sent them this dollar bill to say, just use it for good. And so it's a real challenge. And this is from one of the guys who received it. And one of the guys who's called Rick McKinley is a great guy. And he says, the day that I received the $100 bill, I put it in my pocket. Now what? I know it was mine, but I'd received it from one of the poorest guys that I knew. I knew I had to use it well, but I held on to it for a while. Every now and then I'd take out my wallet and I'd see it again. The bill didn't look ordinary to me. It felt different. It felt like it wasn't really mine. It felt like I was holding a sacred $100 bill. I don't know if I'd ever held a $100 bill before. One day I ended up in a shop with no cash, so I pulled out the $100 bill to just tide me over and repay it. But Shane had written the word love all across the $100 bill, and so that is not why I was in the store, so I put it back in my pocket. And by the time I passed on the money to a single mum that I knew, I received a massive lesson in kingdom economics, that not all treasure is equal and every bill is marked. And what he realized was that he wouldn't spend that money on something that didn't matter, but in the same way, it was just the same money as the money that we have in our wallets every day. But for some reason, it felt sacred. And the challenge that he felt was, if I am marked by God, in the same way, if God has written love on me, then the heart that I have, the way I use my time, my resources, my money, that has got to reflect a different kingdom. And it's got to reflect a different way. And so the question that I believe that Jesus kind of asked us in the same way that kind of he asked me when I was 15 and followed him for the first time, and when I was 18 and left home, and when I was 24 and it all kind of fell apart and I had no money. And time and time and time again, the question he says, am I worth it? Am I worth following? Am I worth laying down your life for? And I know the answer is yes, but I know I have to lay it down again and again. And I know that if I ever lay down life, that laid down lives don't keep hold of their wallets. Like, I don't lay down my life and say, but let me have my wallet, God. You can have everything else. Jesus seems to take it pretty seriously. Seems to take it, well, if you're in, you're in. Like, am I having your life or not? And it is challenging. But I promise us there is a better kingdom. And so I have $10,000. And so I know, that is how rich I am. They are not real dollars. They cost me 3 of the Queen's pounds. That is how rich I am. And so I have one of these in my wallet, because I did this in Lim last week. And so I'm just going to carry that round, and it's just got the word love written on it, as Shane did, just as a challenge that when I go out and when I spend money, I just have this reminder, like, make sure it matches with what I believe, that it matches with what I want to do, what I want to be in my life. I want every part of my life to fall in line with this gospel. Like, I don't want to stand up and say to our young people or this church that I will give my life for this gospel, because they're easy words to say. I want to know what it is to lay down my life, and whatever I have, he can have it. So I'm just going to pray, and then I would invite you to come and grab a $100 bill. And so Sarah's going to fan them out, because I can't do that one-handed. I'm just going to pray, and then, as Sarah kind of finishes us off, then I would just invite you to come and take that, hold it, carry it with you, put it in your wallet. Just as a challenge and a reminder of what matters in this world. God, I just thank you that, you call us to be part of a bigger kingdom. I thank you so much that as we lay down our little lives, you will make them into so much more than we could ever do ourselves. And so, God, we just pray that you would, just challenge us when it comes to fear, when we're afraid, when we find it difficult to trust you. God, will you help us? Will you help us to pursue you, that, Lord, that you are the first in our heart, and that we would want nothing else. Help us with that, we pray. Amen.